what you think, or what you think people think, life would be inconceivable living without. How would you fill in the blank? Go ahead. 30 more seconds. I don't see some people talking. I'm going to trip over this, I know. All right. You see Vizzini up there from The Princess Bride. Inconceivable. Let's get back together. Real quick back here, what'd you hear? Water, food, and what? Sex. So life is, Cooper, have you a comment on that?
Wow, I'm glad I'm not sitting at that table.
Okay, how about over here? Oh, wait, a clarification.
What we said was sex. Like, you can't reproduce, like, things, so.
Nice explanation,
Yeah,
right? Nice little justification for it. We weren't, some of our minds, so, some of our minds went somewhere else, I imagine. But that was a good clarification. What about over here?
Purpose.
Life without purpose would be inconceivable. Agree? And what else over here?
Logic.
Life would be, yeah, you couldn't even make a sentence without logic, interestingly. Two other things over here. Do you guys say anything?
Oh, Jesus. We were talking about like life without God or a higher being.
Life without God, without Jesus would be inconceivable. One more. Back here? Is it Katie?
Yeah.
Katie.
Oxygen.
Well, some things can live without oxygen, right?
I put myself under life.
Okay, yeah. How many people would say this? Some of us? Yeah, you were 21, okay. Right. It's interesting to ask this question. What is absolutely necessary in life? One of the great philosophers of all time, Socrates. Right. No one has seen Bill and Ted's? Excellent. I actually pastored a church in San Dimas where Bill and Ted are from, and they filmed the film at San Dimas High across the street from my church, so I'm allowed to say Socrates and Socrates. So here's what he said. Life without philosophy is inconceivable. Now, how many of us honestly would have agreed with this before we started today? Raise your hand if you would have agreed. Look around. Nobody. Yet Socrates thought that life without philosophy is absolutely inconceivable. Some of the things that you just listed fall under the heading, and I'm going to try to show this over this week, of philosophy. You said logic, you said purpose, you said meaning, understanding what's called the telos, the purpose of sex, all fall under the realm, believe it or not, of philosophy. And so what I'm going to do with you this week, and you can communicate with me because I can change things up if you want to go in some different directions. I'm a philosopher, professional philosopher, but I'm also an ethicist. So I love to talk about ethical issues. I'll be teaching a class tonight from here actually on Zoom called Ethics in Data Analytics, AI, and Big Data. Right, very interesting, very niche kind of field. I teach all math and physics people. They're way smarter than me, but I get to teach them the ethics part, right? So I'm going to teach you a little bit about what is philosophy. We're going to get into things that terms and ideas that you normally use every day. But philosophy will help explain them, and I'm going to try to justify that Christians should use philosophy. In fact, life without it is inconceivable, actually. Now, you don't have to believe that right now, but I'm going to try to demonstrate that to you. And then we're going to talk about knowledge and skepticism And then we'll get into what's called philosophy of religion, some unique arguments for God's existence that you may not have engaged as much. And then we'll talk about Jesus' ethic and dive into some ethics stuff. So that's sort of the big picture, kind of flying over the forest before we dive into the trees. Now, just really quick, a little bit about me. I'm going to share something professional, something personal, and something peculiar about me. So, I work for Reasons to Believe. I'm one of their research scholars. I also oversee what's called a scholar community. This is a group of 165 volunteers, all PhDs in the STEM fields, who we help train to use apologetics in the service of evangelism. So we're talking doctors, lawyers, medical professionals, physicists, all different kinds of scientists in that. I also, for about 20 years, teach philosophy and ethics over at Azusa Pacific University. That's a lot of fun. Though it is a university with a Christian worldview, you don't have to be a Christian to go there. So I have a mixture of students that come in to my community there. Also, I've taught at Tozer Seminary. It's a small seminary up in Northern California, so taught graduate school as well. I do a little bit of that for Azusa. I was a pastor for 20 years at New Song Church, as I mentioned, in San Dimas. And my wife, Tracy, over here, she is not only a financial expert, which she is going to be working on a little bit today, so if you hear someone talking in the background, that'll be her with some clients. But she also is a worship leader, piano player. She led worship during that time I was there, along with other worship leaders. I played drums is another, that's the peculiar thing about me, is I used to work at Disneyland Hotel, and while I did that during graduate school, I oversaw, I was a restaurant manager and did a few other things, but I also was a professional drummer. This is my family. You see Tracy. It's not a Metallica shirt. It's actually, it says Metaphysica. So I get lots of people take double takes on that. My oldest son, Trey, in the middle there, he just got married. He'll be joining us this coming Sunday here in Kauai. He's going to be hanging out with us with his new wife, Jo. And that's my other son, Elias. He's 23. He's an IT professional. He works for JPL in cybersecurity and threat defense. That's such a great title, threat defense. It's like, oh, I want that on my business card. When you can't find me teaching or at RTB, oh, I forgot about Stella. This was our dog, Stella, who just passed away not too long ago. She was a beautiful St. Bernard. We're thinking about getting another one or that, but Stella was just wonderful. She was mistaken at our front door for a lion because she came charging up. And the poor girl who was in high school was selling magazines and literally ran around the house screaming, "Lion, lion!" And I had to go outside and help her. And she goes, "Why do you have a lion?" I said, "No, St. Bernard. And it's really lovable and you can hug it." And she's like, "No, do you want a magazine?" I said, "No." She said, "Okay, bye." And then she went on her way. That's me playing drums at a local place. Tracy actually is the lead singer of some of the bands we play in. I play drums, and it's just a whole lot of fun. So at our house, we don't have a computer room or a study. I mean, we have our computers in that, but we have a drum room with a bunch of instruments in it. So if you don't want to talk about philosophy, let's talk music, drums, or those kinds of things, right? All right, so what's philosophy? I originally thought philosophy was psychology misspelled. A lot of people just don't know what it is. They're not sure what it is, and they certainly wouldn't say that it's life without it is inconceivable. Tracy, I think you were you went to philosophy. You had philosophy class at APU, right? I did. And you loved it, right?
I hated it.
She hated it. And she said, "There's two things I won't marry. Number one is a pastor, and the other one is a philosopher." But that's what she decided to do and go on an adventure.
Well, you weren't either of those when we first met.
I tricked you, I know. I was a drummer though when I met you. So we just celebrated 32 years of marriage. So yeah. Some people think philosophy is makeup. Now this is whoever does the marketing for this is just amazing because I love purity, hope, grace. It's like if I'm going to have these things, I need this makeup. I took this picture at a local mall. Philosophy, believe. Now, I don't know if a person should be a little bit offended by that because, like, I need this makeup in order to have a miracle. So that might be offensive, but no, philosophy, at least essentially, is not a makeup. Is it thinking hard? When students sign up for my class, they just think, oh, this is going to be a lot of hard thinking, and I don't want to take it. But it's a general education requirement, so they have to take it. And they don't think life is inconceivable without philosophy. And they think you just got to think hard. Well, it's true. You do have to think hard, and we're going to do that together. But it's like exercise. It's like hiking. How much exercise do you have to do to go on a long hike? You got to work a little hard to get there. And that's what we'll do a little bit of. Now, just a quick description. Philosophy is not, sometimes we want quick and easy results. Doesn't always happen in philosophy. It does make progress. I'm trying to show you that, actually, when we talk about the problem of evil and God. But philosophy, I'm going to try to show you, is actually seen everywhere. In fact, it asks the most fundamental questions about life. Now, let's take that for a minute. What are some of the most fundamental, most important questions you think people ask about life? We've already kind of pointed to some of them. What would they be? Just help me out. 2 or 3.
What happens when it's over?
Yeah, like this class?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, is there life after death? Is there life after life? Why is that such an important question, do you think? To what? Now I'm a drummer, so you have to speak up a little bit.
We don't know.
Yeah, some people would say we don't know what's after death, so it could be scary, it could be a mystery, or one could have hope if there is some knowledge about life after death. That's a key one, yeah.
Eternity in our hearts, and we want something to be after death.
Right? It seems, this is good, I think you're reading some C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis makes this argument. There seems to be a desire for, now hear me now, for the good in this life to continue. Don't you want, when someone loses a loved one, they miss the good that that person brought into this life, whether how little or how much, right? You want that to continue, but you want the pain, the suffering, and you want the evil to go away, right? So that's a hugely important question. What else? Give me one or two more. Come on.
How to find our identity.
What do you mean? Can you explain what you mean by identity?
Purpose, meaning, value.
Okay. If you're going to find your purpose, you have to know what you are, who you are, right? Some people today will argue, especially if they come from what's called a naturalistic perspective, that there is no such thing as purpose, capital P. So you have to make up little p purposes. But are those ultimately fulfilling? Now, breakfast can be good, and my purpose when I get up is to eat breakfast. But how fulfilling is it ultimately? Yeah, it gets you through the afternoon. Maybe it'll get you through another day, a few other days. But it's not ultimately fulfilling. So philosophy asks these questions. One more. What about from the back? Ultimate question. Big question. Don't be shy. I'm an introvert, so I know I'd like to sit in the class and not want to say anything. But think of me as your coach, right? I'm not like the pitcher trying to strike you out. I'm trying to help you think better. Hit the ball, right? Thoughts? No? Yeah?
Is there a God? What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. So one of the most ultimate questions, is there a divine being, an ultimate source for life, meaning, purpose, and value? Right? Is there a basis for that? And what kind of thing is that? Do we get that from a universe, a physical universe, or something more? So we could ask all these questions, and if you look at these, one or two might jump out at you. All of these actually fall under the discipline of philosophy, though other disciplines like science, psychology, and other disciplines contribute to these questions. What about, do I have a soul? How much soul talk do you hear about these days? If someone is smart, what do we usually say about them? Well, they got a big brain. If you want to put a bunch of ideas up on the board, what are you going to do? You're going to do a what storm? Brainstorm. Everything is reduced, you notice in our language, to physicality. What about a mind that's immaterial? That might be a part of the soul. That's something we can talk about this week. Big questions. Cheating on tests. I'm a teacher. Oh, I'm not saying you're a cheater, right? But what about that? I have some interesting findings that I'm going to share with you about that as we go along. You might not think other things are practical, like are numbers just ideas? What is a number? It's actually a really, really interesting question. Okay. Some people ask this question: does philosophy bake any bread? What does that mean? It means, is it practical? Does it really help us get along in our daily life? Right? And my argument is going to be that yes, it does. In fact, it's like oxygen. You can't live your life without it. You're going to do philosophy whether you call it philosophy or not. As Rick had pointed out, you're going to do theology whether you know it or not. Whether that's denial of God, that's called atheology, or you're going to affirm God, so you have a theology, you're going to do theology no matter what. It's just what kind you're going to do, and are you going to do it well? Notice this, just something practical. If you go on, I don't know, anyone go to graduate school yet? No? If you do go to graduate school, you'll take something like a GRE test or that. One thing you'll notice, if you get good at philosophy or major in philosophy or work at philosophy, notice the test scores. The top people in the verbal and the analytic writing are all philosophers, or have taken philosophy. No offense to the computer scientists, but they're more on the lower end. But as you're going to see in the next slide, if you look at the median incomes, when you get to about the midpoint of your career, computer scientists do pretty good. But notice, people who have had philosophy are way up at the top next to the STEM fields. One of the reasons for that is that philosophy trains you to think well, to think critically, to not be fooled again, as the band The Who said. Right? It trains you to think well. And part of my job this week is not so much to tell you what to think, and you do get some of that, but it's how to think well. Because if you farm well, you're going to eat. And if you think well, you're going to interact with reality in a good way. Is the bus coming at me or not coming at me? Is the bus real or not real? Am I more powerful than buses? Those are important questions. So just a thought, something to think about. Even if you're not a philosophy major, you're not going to take philosophy in graduate school, I really think you want to engage with it because it's going to help your life. Now, I said earlier, Socrates said that life without philosophy is inconceivable. One of his students, ancient Greek philosophers, a few hundred years prior to the time of Christ, Plato, said this: philosophy is a silent dialogue between the soul and the self. So we're trying to see, what is philosophy? What have some of the great philosophers said about it? How do we think about it? Do you ever talk to yourself? Anybody? Yeah? What do you say? Give me your first name. Caitlin. Would you mind, like, what does it sound like when you talk to yourself? Like I say, I like the cake. Don't eat the whole cake.
Yeah, it's more like, should I pick like grapes for breakfast or kiwi, you know, or like
Yeah.
should I eat those eggs, or does bacon sound
Yeah.
good right now, or
Yeah.
should I eat cereal, you know?
That exactly. Do you answer back? Does your mind answer? Do you answer yourself back?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, the kiwi. It's like, no, the grapes. If the grapes talk back, then you have issues, right? In Scripture, you see the same thing. This is kind of a proto or early philosophy, if you will. The psalmist says, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God." You talk to yourself. Your mind talks to itself. Philosophy will help you not only talk to yourself, but actually deepen how you talk to God and how God reveals things to you. I'll try to show that. Aristotle, the student of Plato, so we have Socrates, then Plato, then Aristotle. Aristotle says, all people, it's a part of their nature. You talked about the desire for an afterlife. It's placed within our hearts. God has put it there. Something is put there is he desires for us to know stuff. And then the next hour, I'm going to make a distinction between mere belief and what knowledge is. Okay? Your dad probably talks a lot about that if he does logic and those things. Here are two extremes I want to avoid. You may have already thought of them in your head. The quote is a little dated, and that's fine, but I want to avoid this, and I try to do that with you and in my classes. For many people, the word philosophy just spells boredom. It's like a vegetable that has to be endured, but your parents make you eat it, or your teacher makes you eat it. You kind of know it's good for you, but it's really hard to take down, right? That's one extreme. Boredom. It's drudgery. I don't like the way it tastes. The other extreme is when the philosopher uses philosophy to tear down your worldview. I know so many people who have taken philosophy in college, and they have a philosophy professor who just goes after their worldview or what they believe, and this makes them feel small, and then they ditch philosophy for most of their lives. I mean, this even happens in church. I have my aunt, I'm doing the funeral for my grandmother, my aunt's mom, and I'm trying to get stories to share in the funeral. And I asked my aunt, about church, and she grew up in a Lutheran church, and she said, yeah, one day I was 8, walked up to the pastor, started asking questions about the authority of the Bible, and he said, sit down, be quiet, and just listen. And for 50 years, she never asked another question about God. That's painful. And there we were. I said, her name is Liz. I said, let's ask those questions now. And we had such a rich time talking about that. But for 50 years, she gave up on it, according to her testimony. I see people do that with philosophy. I'm going to argue with Christians, we don't want to do that. We want to invite those questions. That God can handle any question we ask. We're going to ask him anyway. Our mind is, might as well just kind of bring him out in the open. Right? So we don't want philosophy to set itself up as the supreme authority, just capable of decimating anything else. Rather, I see philosophy as a tool, a handmaid, a helper to other disciplines, to theology, to psychology. In fact, early on, philosophy and psychology, philosophy and science were all kind of combined, and it hasn't been until modern times that we just completely separated them and sometimes don't let them talk to one another. We want to let them talk to one another. Now, I'm just curious, because I don't know everyone's age in life. How many have already, in high school or college, taken a philosophy course? 1, 2, okay, maybe 15%. Something that I'm going to do, some of the things you're going to hear, you might think, well, I've heard them. What I hope to do, and Peter says this in 2 Peter chapter 1 towards the end, he says, I'm here to remind you of things that you already know. Right? A parent might say to their kid, pick up the towel. I know, the kid says, right? But you need a reminder for lots of things. Cooper reminded us about how to manage our lives, earlier in his testimony. We need those reminders. I really appreciated what he had to say. It was a good reminder. It's like, I know that, but it was good to bring it to the forefront of my consciousness. Peter goes on to say, towards the end of that chapter, he says, look, you know these things, but I'm gonna put it in a way so that you can always call it to memory. Someone brings up an issue, there is no hope. No. You can explain why you have hope within you, right? So you may know some of the stuff, but I'm going to bring it to the forefront of your consciousness and hopefully try to explain it in a more robust, deeper way. So philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. Now we use words like love and wisdom all the time. And if I was the person on the street and I walked up to you, what's your first name? Zach, and I walked up to Zach and I said, Zach, define love. What would you say? I don't know. Right? But I use love you mom, love you friend, love the cake. We use the word all the time, but sometimes we're just not sure how to define it. Anyone take a shot? There's more than one definition? Well, no, give me a shot. Give it a shot.
English, love.
There's God's love that's
Okay.
unconditional. It has no
Good.
requirements to actually receive it or whatnot.
Okay. So one part definition of love might be it's unconditional. Right? And so we'll start to build an understanding of love. Right? Here's a definition I borrow from one of my professors. I use it at weddings all the time. So if I was interviewed, it's not fair to you because I've had to think about this, right? I go, love is an unconditional or unending commitment to an imperfect person to see God's goals met in their life.
You got that written down?
I'll say it again. Love is an unconditional or unending commitment to imperfect people to see God's goals, purposes met in their life. Now, why is that? I think it's really good. My commitment to you is unending. Even if you are, as you brought up, some people, they're a drug addict. That doesn't mean I'm not committed to their good. I may not be able to work with them in the way they live their life, but I'm still committed to their good. Love is an unending commitment. We know that we're imperfect people, so we're realistic and we're going to need forgiveness. Love needs forgiveness within it. And I'm not managing your life. Whose purposes am I looking out for? God's purposes, right? So we try to unpack these definitions in philosophy. It's not easy, right? That's one opportunity. Another way to define it really simply is love is God's good in your life, or God's intended good, right? Seeking God's good for another is another way to define love. What's wisdom? Anyone want to take a shot? He's like, no, I don't want to take a shot. Yeah.
Like knowledge and just acknowledge that if you follow your common sense or smarts, like book smarts, just things like that. Like a good accumulation of both of those.
Good. I like that. So one of the key things you said, if you're wise, you have to be knowledgeable. Would you agree, though, that you can be knowledgeable in some areas but not wise?
Yes.
All
I
right.
think it's applying the knowledge.
It's applying the knowledge. You had a comment? Sir?
Yeah, I think that wisdom is more than just the knowledge. It's how to use the knowledge that you have.
It's how you use the knowledge. So which means that there's a distinction. You can use that knowledge in a bad way or a good way. So wisdom includes knowledge, which includes some type of understanding, but applying it in a good manner, not an immoral manner or an evil manner, right? In the Old Testament, I think the word is chokmah. I just like saying that word, chokmah. Something coming out of your mouth. It really means skill. Skill to live life, to bring it down home. And I always say to my students, if you were signing up for philosophy class and it said philosophy, learning skill to live life well. Now sign me up, right? I want skill in my relationships, in my parenting, in my work, right? That's really what philosophy gets down to, the love of skill. But skill in a morally praiseworthy way. Let's not forget to add that. Because you can be skillful. You can read this in the Old Testament. You can be skilled, but use it in an immoral way. We see this all the time. So in talking about the word itself, the term philosophy can also refer to just a whole life, the way you live life, right? My philosophy of life is X or Y. And I have a philosophy of drumming on how to hold the sticks, how to set up the drums, right? So it can be applied to a whole life pathway. So it can have a strict, stipulated definition. It can have a big, wider definition. And by the way, the information, if you want it in a PDF format, I'm happy to send it to Rick, and maybe you can distribute it if you guys want that. So it's good. Psychologists tell us it's incredibly good to write down things, especially with pencil, as you're already doing, and I praise that. But if you miss something, don't fret about it. I'll also give it to you. But it's great to write it down. I love it. All right. So you may have heard a verse in the Bible. Was it Zach? Would you mind reading the verse out loud to us? And you can say no. So,
See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ.
yeah, so what's that philosophy?
To not be a slave to it.
Yeah, it can do what?
You captive.
Yeah, take you captive. You want to look up the verse? Would you mind? I know I'm putting you on the spot. Does everyone remember this verse or know this verse? Ever read it before? Yeah.
I think Morgan read it to us yesterday.
Okay, he read it to you. Yeah, can you read it from the text? That's fine. That's I think that's just the NASB. It doesn't matter. It's okay. Now listen, say it loud if you would.
See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ.
Notice anything different? Anyone got the NIV?
Elemental.
Elemental philosophy? Anyone, I'm just curious, anyone has the NIV translation? Yeah? Can you read it? It's okay. No pressure. What did the Acts say about the Bereans? What did they do? When Paul preached, they went and looked at the scripture.
I got it.
Yeah, let me hear it.
Okay. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ.
Yeah, did you notice anything different there? What comes before philosophy?
Hollow and deceptive.
Yeah. A lot of times what you'll hear, I even heard, when I was going to graduate school in philosophy, and I would hear fellow pastors say, watch out for philosophy. But Paul actually makes a very careful definition. He was actually a really good philosopher, Paul was. He says, be careful of hollow and deceptive philosophy. So it's not philosophy that's bad. We could say the same thing, watch out for hollow and deceptive theology. There's some bad theology out there. If I was a restaurant manager, if you came in and you ate food and a few minutes later you got sick, you'd call me up and say, I had some bad food. And then you say, that's it, I'm giving up food. It's not going to happen, right? Just because you had bad food doesn't mean there isn't good food still, right? Same thing with philosophy. There's bad philosophy. But we need good philosophy to combat it. In fact, you're reading C.S. Lewis. You're reading The Great Divorce and Mere Christianity? Is that? Next. Mere Christianity. In The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis, he says good philosophy must exist, if for nothing else, in order to combat bad philosophy. Right? So even just at minimum, we need it as a tool to combat bad philosophies so it doesn't take people captive because it's hollow and deceptive. Right? So make note of that. That's something you should be able to pull to the forefront of your consciousness. That it's not philosophy that's bad, but it's hollow and deceptive philosophy. Lewis says we need good philosophy to combat bad philosophy. What if there were good philosophies along with good people who were able to combat Nazism? Right? Bad philosophy. Here's a working definition that I use. It comes from a gentleman named Ed Miller. He says, philosophy is the attempt to think rationally and critically about the most important questions. Pretty straightforward here. It's an attempt, or you can even say skill, developing the skill to think rationally and critically about the most important questions. Look, most of us don't have the time that research scholars have to research ideas. And that's why we need them to help us along the way. Right now, you're a research scholar. You're here, you get to take the time to think deeply about these things. My dad was a truck driver, and he worked 16 to 20, sometimes 20 hours. There weren't the same laws at the time. And he didn't have the same time to think about these things that I was able to in graduate school. But what was interesting, I found out later on that when he was in the truck, he would try to think deeply about these sort of things. So whether you're the president or a plumber, you can be a good philosopher, and you can delve into these things. Okay, to finish up our time, I'm going to suggest to you, it's not original with me, so I'm not taking credit here, but some people will tell us that philosophy comes to us, or we engage it in 3 different ways. Okay? The first, I'm going to call 3 levels. The first level that we engage philosophy are the different fields of philosophy. It's when we use reason and logic, and we openly engage. We tell each other what we believe and why we believe it. And we try to use reason and logic to do that. Now, I don't have time to go into all these fields, but they each fall under the domain of philosophy. So there's metaphysics, which is the study of reality, which can include the reality of God. Give me your first name again. Alexis. Do you have a sister or younger?
I'm the youngest.
You're the youngest. Let's say you had a younger sister and she came up to you and she said, hey, I heard Charlie Brown is in town. Can we go see him? What would you say?
Charlie Brown is a cartoon.
Charlie, but he's at the Pantages Theater in LA. He's going to be there, sis. Please take me there.
He's probably in a costume.
He's in a costume. So is what you're saying that Charlie Brown is real?
Is real or
Is not real. Are you going to dash my love for Charlie Brown? I think he's cute.
Yes, I mean, Santa Claus was still pretty fascinating.
Oh man, you just like ratcheted it up there.
Fair, I was a kid who told everybody.
Okay. It's not real. She cries, right? Well, I work for Disney, and there's a lot of people wearing Mickey Mouse shirts who have annual passes, who have Disney everything around them. And it sure looks like that Mickey Mouse is real to them. But you would say, not real. But is there a sense that Mickey Mouse or Charlie Brown is real?
In your mind, I guess.
In your mind? Yeah, and you can be put on paper, animation, a costume, a stage play.
It's something someone created, so it's somewhat real.
You were created. Are you somewhat real? Now remember, I'm trying to be a coach, not a pitcher, so I'm not trying to strike you out with my questions. We're just trying to think well together, right? So metaphysics gets into those questions. And it might seem trivial about Charlie Brown, but when we start to ratchet it up, Santa Claus, Saint Nick, Jesus, God, what kind of reality is that? You know, when someone says, can you prove God exists? What do they mean by prove? What kind of reality are we talking about? If I say I have 4 philosophy books in the trunk of my car, you have an idea what that is, right? But what if I said I have mercy in the trunk of my car? And mercy isn't my sister.
I was going to say, who's that?
I mean the virtue mercy. Would you go look in the trunk of my car for the virtue of mercy? I got one volunteer. Right? Mercy seems to be a different kind of thing than a philosophy book, right? So we get into those kinds of questions. We'll see more about this as we go along. Epistemology. It's a big word. Episteme in Greek just means our theory of knowledge, how we know things, how we come to know things. What are the sources of our knowledge? What is truth? How do we define it? We'll get into that. Value theory. This is a big field that deals with issues of worth and importance. Is there objective worth in the world? Are some things more valuable than other things? See, we have an affirmative answer. Right? This breaks out, very interestingly, and this is into my field, the field of ethics. So ethics is about worth and importance, but mainly has to do with human relations. Now, it could be your relation to the creation or to nature. There's other things we can talk about. Our relationship to data, that's something I talk about. Huge field, and we'll talk, again, that's something else we'll jump into. Aesthetics. This has to do with the realm of beauty. Is beauty in the eye of the beholder? It's only subjective. Or are some things more beautiful than others?
More people agree that there's some things that are like, yeah, more people agree, I guess there would be more.
Why would you have an award show if some things aren't better than others?
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, people don't like their art judged. And there's a whole realm of artists who do art so that it can't be judged. In Orange County, we have at a museum, it's about it's a 30-foot tall dog statue with its leg up peeing on the side of the museum. Now that's art, I guess, but it's a good art. Some will say, you can't say that. It's just art. It is whatever it means to you. Or do you think that, no, some things are worth?
Why?
And why? Yeah, you ask the question why, right? If you're, give me your first name. Paige. So, Paige, you're a mom, and you have a young daughter, 4 years old, and her name is? Yes. Huh? Alyssa. So, Alyssa, in the restaurant, draws you a stick figure. It says, Mommy, this is you. You're so pretty. And she hands you the napkin with the little thing. She goes, will you put this up by your computer and remember me all day long? What would you say?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And then, oh no, a fire breaks out. What do? Who do you grab first? Alyssa. I thought you said the dog. It goes to our point here. You grab Alyssa, and you bring her outside. Who else is in the house? The dog. Maybe you grab the dog, and you said, the fire people are coming. I'm gonna try to do one more thing. And Alyssa says, please, Mommy, get the picture. Would you run back in?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Would anyone run in to get Alyssa's picture? Yeah? Why?
I don't know. I just feel like if I was looking at my daughter and she was just like, please, I couldn't say no. So
You couldn't say
it
no.
was a lot to her.
Right. Okay. What's your first name? Keely. Beautiful name. Okay, Keely, you run in and you see it down the hall. You see Alyssa's picture and you have tears and you're going to go after it. But then suddenly you remember and you notice right to your left as the fire's coming down, you're Van Gogh. Worth millions. In fact, you don't care it's worth millions. You just think it's beautiful. And you go, Alyssa, Van Gogh, which one do you grab? You can only grab one. Hurry, you got 10 seconds.
I go with Alyssa's because she just means more to me than a painting.
Well, Alyssa's already outside.
I know, but
You're risking your life for a napkin.
who she is, like, I know that she made it for me, and like Van Gogh doesn't necessarily make that for me.
Oh, so it has to be for you in order for it to be beautiful and good.
No, I'm
Oh,
just saying it was for meaning because she put so much thought and effort into it.
Alyssa's live, she can do it again.
Yeah. No, it's good. Most of the time, no, I'm protecting Keely. I'm protecting. Most people that I ask say that they'll get the napkin. Now, I think you should get the Van Gogh because your next door neighbor who works for the New York Art Museum sees you running out with a napkin and he flips. Right? He's, why did you? And he's on his knees in the street pounding his arms. Right? So don't tell me that philosophy doesn't matter. Yes, Rick.
Actually was there when something like that happened.
Mm.
And he was a musician, he had a huge guitar collection. And as he's using one of the cars was mine, I go to rental car. And as he's loading guitars in my car, I realize he's left some these really expensive, really nice Martins on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
He put this crappy looking guitar in my car, and I go, when we finally drove off, I go, why that guitar? And he goes, I mean,
He said what?
I made it. Now, you just described this really interesting story. In your opinion, was he right? Now, if you say that it doesn't matter, then what if the person ran in, didn't get Alyssa, and got a pill bug and brought it out and put it in their car safely?
in economic terms, he was wrong.
In economic terms. Okay.
In emotional terms, he was right.
Emotional terms. Does one trump the other one? Descriptively, in practical life, for many it does. But again, what if I rescue the pill bug and not my daughter, Alyssa? I'm emotionally attached to the pill bug. You would say there's something wrong with me. A little roly-poly? You ever seen those? You ever seen a pill bug? Oh, roly-poly. Yeah. Now, if you read my bio as an ethicist, and it says he saves pill bugs for a living, can care less about kids, I guarantee you that most of you are going to have a hard time listening to me. Am I right? It's true, right? But notice how much pressure you feel in the culture to go with your feeling. I'm not against feelings. I love them. I have some of them right now even. Right? So God made the feelings, but they have to be handled in an ordered way. We can get into it, but that's what aesthetics does. Politics is going to be a part of that. I'm going to skip that for right now. Logic, right reasoning. You have 4 fields: metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, logic. You should memorize those because a good intellect, well-trained, is going, when they're reading, when they're listening to someone talk, when they're listening to a podcast, reading an article from the newspaper, you need to pick out when are they doing metaphysics, when are they doing epistemology, when are they doing value theory. Right? And I can help you. You're going to see it all over the place. And some people don't like it because then it starts popping out to them all the time. They're watching a movie, and they're metaphysics, epistemology, value theory. My kids hated it too because I would pause, right? And I go, you know what they're doing right here? Dad! Just can we watch the movie?
My sister, this is the classic plot. There's 3 wives.
Well, that's kind of,
I can tell you the ending.
Yeah. So look, this is level 1 philosophy where we're engaging these kinds of questions at this level, right? Let's take some questions right after this. Level 2 philosophy is philosophy that you get and you're not readily thinking about it. It happens from the media, the arts. I can make a whole list for you. You can get philosophy from plays, from poetry, a painting. I was on a plane ride on a missions trip to Venezuela. I was watching a movie called Bandits with Bruce Willis. Sorry, I might have been in that picture. Sorry about that. Watching it, good movie in the sense of great character development. These guys are bandits. They're bank robbers, but they do bank robbing in a cool way. They don't hurt anybody. They go to the manager the night before. They sit down, hold them captive, eat dinner with them, go to the bank the next day, all with suits on, holding the bank manager captive, but the bank manager opens up, no alarm, opens up the vault. They take the money, tie her up, leave. Nobody gets hurt. They take the money and then live their life. I'm sitting on the plane. and I'm rooting for the bandits to win. And I said, oh my soul, why do you want the bandit? That could be my money in the bank. What am I thinking, right? I was getting philosophy without thinking about it, and that's okay. I don't want us to not enjoy movies, but we should think about them afterwards, right, or during.
I was actually thinking about that on the plane the other day watching a cartoon, literally going, why is it that the movie always sets you up to root for one person or another person, and it could be the bad one, it could be the good one, but you're set up right away to root for somebody.
Yeah, the writer has a plan in mind, right? And it's okay for us to, I mean, that's part of what makes life rich, is to be able to jump into the story and journey along with the characters. So I'm not saying don't separate yourself from that, but also have the skill that at some other point you think about it deeply, right? A writer said, those of you who are musicians, he said, give me the making of songs of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. In other words, you'll remember the worship song and lyric more than you will the sermon in most cases. Right? So philosophers have always taken musicians very seriously. They've taken art very seriously because it communicates at a deep level. The final one, we'll stop with this one, is level 3, barroom banter or kitchen table conclusions, I call it. These are discussions that happen in everyday life, at the kitchen table, at the restaurant you're at, coffee shop, on a plane ride, whatever. This is where you do philosophy, and you're just engaging the person, but you are doing philosophy. Let me give you one story, a couple questions, take a break, okay? So I was going through graduate school in philosophy and ethics, working for an embassy suites. And there I'm trained to do all sorts of jobs. One of those, close your ears, I was a bartender. So going through seminary and bartender. So I'm about to close, this is a hotel with its own restaurant and bar, about to close down the bar. 2 people come in, they sit down, can we have a drink? Sure, no problem. I'm about to close, so you can have 1 or 2, but enjoy your time. The people are, a foot away from you. You hear their conversations. So I'm doing my cleanup work, and this is their first date. And I can, they're getting all googly and then cuddling up to each other. And guy says, hey, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. Where's the restroom? Easy question. Go right outside these doors, down the hall, right on your right-hand side. He says, thank you. Gets up, walks out, goes to the restroom. She's sitting there. She says, hey, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And I thought she was going to ask, where's the restroom? The ladies' restroom. She says, you probably have already heard this is my first date with this guy. And I want to ask you a question. He just asked me to get a room with him here at the hotel. Should I do it? And I looked behind me like she was asking someone else, And I'm like, you're asking me? And she says, well, you look like you have an honest face. And I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that. She says, no, seriously. I said, seriously, you're asking me. She said, yeah, should I get the room? Well, what's your thought? And I waited for a moment. Whether it came from my mind or God, I'm not sure, but then something came to my head. And I looked at her, and I said, all right, let me ask you a question first. What would you like, let's say in 20 years, if I'm still at the bar, and your daughter comes in and asks me the same question, what would you want me to tell her? And she looked at me, and she said, I don't like you. Then she got a little smile, and she got the point. Now, I could have went all dad on her and said, what are you thinking? This is your first date. You don't know what the. But instead, I asked her a nice question that gets her to think about her own values. And what does she really care about? Now, if she would have said, well, I would have told my daughter, you do what you think is right. Okay. Or you do what feels good. We would have had a different conversation, but she got it. And that was philosophy. That was ethics right there in the middle of the bar. All right. Quick comments, questions of anything that I've said so far. Tell me something that maybe jumped out at you, something, a takeaway, and then we'll take a break. Yeah, good.
I have a question. This is kind of a little off topic, but
Yeah, yeah.
just earlier when you were saying with, I forget what it was, but you were using a batting reference
Yes.
for when you asked a question back, not to attack, but to encourage. What was the reference you gave? I really liked that, but I forget what it was.
I said, if you're the batter, think of me not as the pitcher, but your batting coach.
Batting coach. Okay.
Because the pitcher and the batter are in an adversarial relationship,
Yeah, I liked how you described that.
right? But if I'm your batting coach, especially in a situation like this, I'm not here to strike you out. I'm here to help you hit, to get on base, to get a home run, to help you hit better. And many times, the players are better than the coach, or the coach is at a point where they can't play as well anymore, but they know they're wise enough to teach them. Hopefully, that's what my aim here is that I've been down the road a little bit and I can teach you these things, even though you can apply them and do amazing things with them. So that was the analogy. What else? One or two more? Give me some feedback. Yeah.
So I know it was different in a lot of the versions, but as a Christian and a philosopher, what do you think the Bible, like talking about principalities and powers, which it references in verse 10 in the same context as verse 8, talking about bad philosophy? And we heard in some of the different versions talking about eternal spirits and philosophy. How does spirits and philosophy coincide at all?
Yeah. If I'm understanding you right, you correct me or stop me if I'm not understanding what you're saying. It's in Galatians, there's actually a phrase Paul talks about, doctrines of demons. A doctrine has philosophy built into it, right? And a doctrine of a demon or a principality maybe or something else that is spiritual in this case is going to try, I think Cooper said it, get you out of the will of God or get you off track, right? So they're going to give you a false impression or picture of reality. So I would highly recommend you go at some point this week to 2 Corinthians 10. Read 2 Corinthians 10 and see what Paul says about spiritual warfare. This goes to your question, I think. He says there are strongholds, and then he defines what strongholds are. They're arguments. And we're supposed to look at these things, hold them up to the knowledge, the person of Christ, and see whether or not they're good or bad. The bad ones we throw in the trash, the good ones we keep, right? So part of our spiritual warfare is actually to use philosophy to engage doctrines, ideas that can end up ruling our life. And we need to evaluate them to see if they hold up to what Jesus and Paul and the other apostles have taught us. Does that make sense? Last one? Anybody? All right. Tell me the mode. We're about at 10. Take a 10-minute break, 5-minute break. What do you do?